A man was lured by an anonymous figure to disguise himself as a monk and commit an act of disrespect against the Holy Eucharist. In the end, he paid for that choice with his own life. This is a true story that took place in an Asian country, an incident whispered within communities, mentioned cautiously in conversations, and shared in fragments across online platforms. Before anything else, we want to affirm clearly, this story is not intended to attack, belittle, or mock any religion, community, or individual. Its purpose is not division, but reflection. In many places across Southeast Asia, faith is interwoven with daily life. Temples, churches, and shrines stand side by side. People greet one another with different prayers, yet walk the same streets, share the same markets, and carry the same quiet hopes for a peaceful life. But even in places like these, manipulation can slip in unnoticed. Sometimes people are pushed into wrongdoing not by extremist ideology, but by poverty, pressure, or the tempting promise of easy money until they find themselves doing things they never imagined. The man at the center of this story was not a demon. He was not a religious fanatic, nor a symbol of conflict between different faiths. He was a father drowning in debt, a husband struggling and failing to provide for his family, a human being cornered by circumstance and exploited by those who prey on desperation. His actions were wrong, but the hands that guided him were far more complicated than hatred. Throughout this story, you will encounter moments that weigh heavily on the heart. You will witness choices born from fear, pride, shame, and ignorance. Some scenes may involve sacred religious items, but they are described only as part of the character's misguided path, not to criticize or disrespect any system of belief. The aim is to expose the consequences of manipulation, not to diminish what is sacred. As you read, remember that every community has vulnerable individuals, those who can be misled, those who are overlooked, those who only come into society's view when tragedy strikes. This story seeks to illuminate that fragility, not to assign blame. We invite you to enter the following chapters with a reflective heart. Consider human weakness, the weight of temptation, and the harsh truth that not every wrongdoer begins as a villain. Some are shaped, pushed, and changed by unseen hands. And now, with respect for all religions and all people, we open the first pages of this tragedy. A chain of mistakes, born from a borrowed monk's robe, a moment of ignorance, and a choice that could never be undone. His name was Arun. At 34, he looked far older than the number suggested, his face carved by sleepless nights, his shoulders hunched beneath the invisible weight of choices he never wanted to make. Life had pressed him into a corner long before the day his path crossed with the man who would change everything. Arun was a father of two. His eldest, Mira, was 8, bright, gentle, always clutching a worn-out sketchbook she filled with dreams she could not yet name. The youngest, Tanu, was barely 3, still waddling through the world with unguarded joy. His wife, Soria, worked long hours cleaning rooms at a local guest house, her palms rough from chemicals, her voice soft from exhaustion. Together, they tried to build a safe life in a cramped rental apartment at the edge of the city. But safety, like comfort, had become a luxury they could no longer afford. Debt had anchored itself in their home like a silent intruder. Medical bills from Tanu's fever last year, a loan from a relative who now demanded repayment, and the rising costs of rent, all these piled up like stones on Arun's chest. He had once worked steadily as a mechanic at a small garage, but the shop had closed during an economic downturn. Since then, work came only in irregular bursts, fixing a neighbor's motorbike, delivering goods on his old scooter, or helping unload crates at midnight for a few spare bills. But it was never enough. Poverty, Arun had learned, was not loud. It whispered, it gnawed. It slipped between the cracks of daily life until the smallest mistake felt like a collapse. And the longer the struggle dragged on, the more easily temptation found its way into the cracks of the human spirit. Arun had acquaintances, friends, he once called them, with whom he shared beers in the alleys behind the market. Men who lived in the shadows of legality, always muttering about easy jobs and easy cash. He tried to avoid their invitations, but desperation changed the way choices appeared. Over time, their words didn't sound corrupt anymore. Just possible. One evening, as Arun sat outside his apartment repairing an old radio someone paid him to fix, a tall man approached him. He wore a black cap pulled low over his face, and his voice carried a smooth authority that immediately set Arun on edge. "You're Arun?" the man asked, as if already knowing the answer. "Yes," Arun replied cautiously, setting the radio aside. "I've heard you're having a hard time. Debts, children, no stable job." The man's tone bordered on sympathy, but something about it felt rehearsed. "I can help you make real money." Arun tensed. "I don't do illegal things." The man smiled faintly. "Nothing dangerous? Nothing that will hurt anyone physically? Just a performance." He reached into his bag and produced a neatly folded saffron robe, the kind worn by Buddhist monks across the region. Arun's breath caught. "What is this for?" "It's simple," the man said. "You wear the robe, you go to a certain location, you do exactly what we tell you to do. We film it, and you walk away with more money than you have seen in years." Arun felt cold. "A monk's robe isn't a costume. It is today," the man replied flatly. "We just need someone who looks the part." "I tin. What would I have to do?" The man did not answer directly. Instead, he leaned in, lowering his voice to a whisper. "Some people want attention. They want outrage. Such things travel fast on the internet. You'll be seen, yes, but not recognized. The robe will hide your identity, and afterward, you'll have enough cash to take your family out of debt." Arun's stomach twisted. He felt both disgust and temptation clawing at each other inside him. "How much?" he asked, against his better judgment. The man named a figure that made Arun's heartbeat stutter. It was enough to cover their rent for months, enough to pay back the loan, enough to buy food without anxiety for once. "Why me?" Arun asked, voice hoarse. "You're desperate," the man answered, as if stating a simple fact. "And desperate people listen." Arun looked down at his hands, calloused, trembling. He thought of his daughter's sketchbook with its empty pages because they couldn't afford new pencils. He thought of his wife waking up before dawn, dragging her tired body to work. He thought of Tanu coughing in the night, the leftover fear that still lingered in him from that hospital stay. Moral lines blurred when hunger sat at the table. The man placed the robe into Arun's hands gently, almost ceremoniously. "Think about it," he said. "We'll meet again tomorrow." But Arun didn't sleep that night. The robe lay folded on the shelf, its saffron color glowing faintly in the dim light. He stared at it for hours, imagining himself putting it on, imagining himself pretending to be something sacred, something trusted. The shame clawed at him, but the fear of not being able to provide for his children clawed harder. By sunrise, his decision was already made. The next evening, he met the man again in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside were two others men Arun recognized vaguely from his old drinking group. They greeted him with smirks that made his stomach churn. "You're really doing it," one of them said, handing him a bottle of water. "Good, easy cash." Arun tried to steady his hands as the mysterious benefactor laid out the plan. Not every detail was given, only enough instructions to carry out the staged act. His task was simple, they said. Act like a monk. Walk calmly. Do the motion exactly as instructed. Ignore the meaning behind it. They insisted, again and again, that the religious significance did not matter, that it was just for the camera. But Arun felt the weight of the robe as he put it on. Though it was light, it felt heavy with expectation, heavy with something he could not name. He tied the sash nervously, watching himself in a cracked mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not a holy figure, not a monk, not even a convincing imitation. It was a frightened man pretending to wear dignity. "Good," the benefactor said, stepping behind him. "Now you look the part." Arun looked away from the mirror, unable to meet his own eyes. Whatever path he had been walking before, this was the step that would take him somewhere he could never return from. And in that dim warehouse, wrapped in a robe that was never his to wear, Arun took the first step toward the choice that would unravel his life. The warehouse became their meeting place, a dim, dust-filled hollow that smelled of rust, old wood, and secrets. Arun stood inside it again the following night, the monk's robe draped over his arm like a burden he had agreed to carry. 3 men waited for him. The mysterious benefactor, always quiet and composed, Rith, a wiry man with a restless grin, and Van, heavier, slower, but with eyes that glittered with opportunistic hunger. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, flickering every few minutes as if reluctant to illuminate the cruelty being plotted beneath it. "Let's go over the plan again," the benefactor said, tapping a cigarette against a metal beam. "Everything needs to look real. No hesitation, no confusion." Rith moved to a makeshift table where a cheap smartphone was set up on a small tripod. "We'll shoot from 3 angles. One camera here, one hidden behind the fence near the church gate, and Van will carry the 3rd handheld. Close-up shots. Raw footage spreads the best." Van nodded proudly, patting his pocket where the last camera was stored. "People don't believe polished videos anymore," he added. "They want shaky hands, real emotion, chaos." Arun swallowed, feeling his throat tighten. They talked about manipulation so casually, as if outrage, belief, and sacredness were commodities to be traded in a dark corner for money. His stomach churned, but he said nothing. The benefactor gestured toward the robe in Arun's hands. "Put it on. We'll rehearse everything." Arun obeyed. The fabric slid over his skin, soft yet suffocating. As the robe settled on his shoulders, he felt as though he had stepped into a role he did not understand, one he should never have agreed to play. They led him to the open space in the warehouse where chalk lines marked a small square. "This is the area in front of the church," Van explained. "Pretend you're walking over the line here. Slow steps, calm, like a monk on a morning round." Arun tried. He moved his feet deliberately, lowering his eyes, mimicking the gestures he had seen monks perform in temples since childhood. But every motion felt hollow, stiff, dishonest. Rith laughed under his breath. "Relax, Arun. You look like you're carrying a boulder on your back." The benefactor intervened. "No jokes. He needs to get this right." Then, turning to Arun, he added, "Remember, this is just a performance. You're not hurting anyone directly." But Arun knew how thin that reassurance was. The act might not physically harm anyone, but spiritually, emotionally, it was an insult, a violation, a provocation designed to ignite indignation in people who held their faith dearly. "What exactly will happen after it's done?" Arun asked quietly. "We release the footage," the benefactor said. "It will circulate. People will argue. Views will explode. And someone who wants attention, someone who benefits from chaos, will pay us. That's all you need to know." Arun felt a chill crawl up his spine. "And if they find out who I am?" The benefactor's expression darkened. "They won't. They won't. They won't." Rith smirked. "Not unless you mess up." The rehearsal continued for nearly an hour. Arun repeated the motions. Walk in, take the object from the disguised container, perform the act, step back, and exit quickly. The men corrected him repeatedly. "Slower. Don't look around. I fallament oling me. Hold it like this. Good now again." By the 10th rehearsal, Arun's mind had grown numb. His conscience, however, had not. Each repetition etched deeper guilt into him, like invisible ink that would eventually become impossible to ignore. He kept reminding himself of the money of the rent overdue by 2 weeks, of the debt collector who had threatened him last month, of his daughter's fading smile when she folded her empty lunch bag. He needed the money. He had to believe he needed it more than he needed forgiveness. But the discomfort in his chest refused to fade. When he returned home later that night, Soria was waiting at the door. She stood with her arms crossed, her eyebrows drawn in worry and disappointment. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Working," Arun answered quickly, stepping past her. "At this hour?" Her voice softened, but the concern grew sharper. "You've been coming home late every night this week. You didn't even say goodnight to the children." Guilt struck him sharply, but he forced himself to remain still. It's temporary. I'm helping some friends. Friends? The word trembled on her lips. Which friends? The ones who only look for you when they need something? The ones who laugh at your struggles? Arun clenched his jaw. I'm doing this for us, don't I, Deed? This is, and Kaimile Evanter. Soria approached him, placing a trembling hand on his arm. He looked at her, really looked. The dark circles beneath her eyes, the weariness in her posture. She had been carrying too much alone, and now he was distancing himself further. But he couldn't tell her the truth. If she knew, she would beg him to stop. She would cry. She would fear for him, for their family, for their souls. He couldn't face that. So he shook his head. Not now. I just need some time. The disappointment in her eyes was unmistakable, but she nodded slowly, stepping back. I hope you know what you're doing. Arun wished he did. The following night, rehearsals continued. The group tweaked small details, adjusting angles and discussing how to maximize the emotional impact of the staged act. We need people angry, Rith said, pacing around. Not confused. It has to look intentional. And believable, Van added. You have the face for it, miserable, serious, perfect for a monk. Arun winced. He didn't know whether it was an insult or a twisted compliment. The benefactor handed him a small cloth pouch. This will hold the item. Don't open it until we're at the location. Less chance of you backing out. Arun froze. The implication struck him. Backing out? Yes, the man said calmly. You have doubts. I can see it. But remember, if you walk away now, someone else will do it instead. And you'll go home with empty hands and the same old problems. Arun felt his stomach twist. They knew. They could smell his hesitation like wolves circling a wounded animal. He took the pouch. His fingers trembled around the drawstring. Good, the benefactor said. Tomorrow night. Be ready. At home? The tension only worsened. Soria tried to talk to him again at dinner, but Arun had no words. Tanu tugged at his sleeve, wanting to show him a new drawing, a messy picture of their family standing under a crooked sun. Arun forced a smile and patted his son's head, but his heart felt hollow. Mira watched her father quietly, sensing something was wrong. Children had a way of understanding without being told. That night, as his family slept, Arun sat alone in the living room, staring at the cloth pouch resting on the table. Every instinct screamed at him to throw it away, to burn it, to run from whatever tomorrow held. But running wouldn't feed his children. Regret wouldn't pay the rent. Morality wouldn't erase debt. He buried his face in his hands. Just one job, he whispered to the empty room. Just this once, then I'll stop. The night offered no answer. Only silence. The kind of silence that waits for a man to step fully into the mistake he can no longer avoid. The robe lay folded on the shelf, its saffron color glowing faintly in the dim light. He stared at it for hours, imagining himself putting it on, imagining himself pretending to be something sacred, something trusted. The shame clawed at him, but the fear of not being able to provide for his children clawed harder. By sunrise, his decision was already made. The next evening, he met the man again in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside were two others men Arun recognized vaguely from his old drinking group. They greeted him with smirks that made his stomach churn. You're really doing it, one of them said, handing him a bottle of water. Good, easy cash. Arun tried to steady his hands as the mysterious benefactor laid out the plan. Not every detail was given, only enough instructions to carry out the staged act. His task was simple, they said. Act like a monk. Walk calmly. Do the motion exactly as instructed. Ignore the meaning behind it. They insisted, again and again, that the religious significance did not matter, that it was just for the camera. But Arun felt the weight of the robe as he put it on. Though it was light, it felt heavy with expectation, heavy with something he could not name. He tied the sash nervously, watching himself in a cracked mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not a holy figure, not a monk, not even a convincing imitation. It was a frightened man pretending to wear dignity. "Good," the benefactor said, stepping behind him. "Now you look the part." Arun looked away from the mirror, unable to meet his own eyes. Whatever path he had been walking before, this was the step that would take him somewhere he could never return from. And in that dim warehouse, wrapped in a robe that was never his to wear, Arun took the first step toward the choice that would unravel his life. The afternoon sun hung low, painting the narrow streets in shades of fading gold, as the protagonist, still known to his accomplices simply as the monk, made his way toward the small church on the edge of town. From the outside, it looked ordinary enough. White walls, slightly weather-stained by years of monsoon winds, a modest cross atop the roof, and a courtyard swept clean earlier that morning by an elderly caretaker. Nothing about the building hinted at the storm that was about to enter it. He tightened the fake saffron robe around his waist, adjusting the folds exactly as he had practiced. The fabric felt strange against his skin, too light, too unfamiliar, too honest for the lie he was wearing. Each tug seemed to remind him that he was stepping into a world where he did not belong. His accomplices waited some distance away, pretending to be passers-by. They blended in easily with the street. One leaned against a food stall, holding his phone in a way that looked casual but was angled for recording. Another browsed a fruit cart, occasionally glancing toward the church entrance. The third sat on a motorcycle, helmet on, visor down, ready to create a diversion if necessary. Their presence was invisible to most eyes, yet to him, it felt like an entire audience judging every step he took. The man swallowed. The air was thick, humid, and strangely quiet. Even the usual chatter of the neighborhood seemed muted, as though the buildings themselves sensed something was wrong. "Just get it done," he muttered under his breath, but his hands trembled. He paused at the church gate. A small wooden board hung beside it. Open for prayer. It wasn't a service hour. Only a few worshippers would be inside, if any. That was the plan. His handlers wanted a calm environment, the kind that made the shock more disturbing when the video was later edited, captioned, and sent out to stir the online world. He pushed the gate open. Its faint creak cut through the silence. Inside the courtyard, a cluster of potted plants lined the walkway. A statue of Mary stood at the far end, serene and unbothered by the world. A breeze brushed past him, rustling the leaves, and for the briefest moment he hesitated. A coldness ran down his spine, not fear of being caught, but something deeper, harder to explain. He shook it off, forcing himself to continue. As he approached the church doors, he could almost hear the faint buzz of cameras tracking him from behind. He knew the men were watching, waiting, eager for the footage that would earn them their payout. The thought tightened his chest. He had agreed to this. He had gone too far to back out now. He pushed the door gently. Inside, the church was dim, lit by soft yellow bulbs and candles flickering in red glass holders. The faint scent of incense still lingered from the morning mass. Wooden pews stood in neat rows, polished smooth by years of devotion. Every detail seemed to breathe stillness, reverence, a kind of peace he had not felt in years. Two elderly women knelt in prayer at the front, rosaries dangling from their hands, their heads bowed in deep concentration. They did not notice him enter. "Thank you for watching. And old estate always full roovers. Have some breeding for and out always." Or perhaps they did, but thought nothing of it. Monks often walked freely into temples, so perhaps their minds translated his robe into familiarity, not threat. His footsteps echoed faintly, one soft thud after another, as he moved down the central aisle. The altar glowed faintly under a small spotlight. Upon it rested the golden ciborium, its lid closed, and beside it, a single consecrated host lay on the paten, prepared earlier for a sick parishioner who never arrived. He had been told exactly what to do. Walk forward, pause dramatically, lift the wafer, sneer, step on it, smile, walk out. The blueprint of the act had been drilled into him during rehearsal. But now, standing in the dim sanctuary, the ridiculousness of the plan pressed in on him. Why would anyone want to see this? Why would anyone pay for this? He reached the front pew and stopped. His breathing grew shallow. His palms were slick with sweat. He glanced subtly toward the entrance. Through the narrow crack between the partially open doors, he saw a phone lens glint in the sunlight. They were already filming. He forced his mind to go numb. He stepped onto the marble platform of the altar, a forbidden action for anyone not authorized, though he didn't understand that. He only knew the plan required it. He reached out, his hand hovering over the host. "It's just a wafer," he told himself. "Just a piece of bread. Just a prop." Yet something about its simplicity unnerved him. It looked delicate, almost weightless, and yet its presence felt heavier than anything he had touched before. He didn't understand why. His fingers brushed it. He hesitated. In the front pew, one of the elderly women stirred. She lifted her head slightly, sensing movement behind her. Her face remained calm, but her eyes widened a fraction as she realized the stranger on the altar was not a priest. He gripped the host quickly, as though afraid his courage would collapse at any second. He lifted it just as the accomplices wanted, arrogantly, mockingly. Then he dropped it to the floor. It made no sound, but to him it felt like a shout. He raised his foot. Again, he hesitated. This time, the hesitation was longer, pregnant, trembling, almost suffocating. Every muscle in his leg felt frozen. An invisible weight pushed down on his shoulders. A fierce heat built in his chest. A sudden and unexpected shame that he didn't understand. One of his accomplices coughed loudly from outside a sharp, deliberate cue. The man forced the act. He pressed his foot onto the host. He stepped down hard. At that exact moment, one of the praying women gasped loudly, involuntarily. The sound echoed across the small church. She rose shakily to her feet, pointing at him, her face pale with shock. What are you doing?" she cried, her voice trembling. The other woman followed, confusion turning into alarm. Their sudden movement startled him, and panic surged through his veins. He backed away from the altar, his heart hammering. The shame he had been suppressing now crashed through him in a violent wave. He stumbled, nearly tripping over the hem of the robe. Outside, a phone captured everything. Inside, he stood frozen, realizing too late that nothing about this moment was staged anymore. He had crossed a line he didn't even understand. And something in the air, some heavy, unspoken gravity, told him there would be consequences. The robe lay folded on the shelf, its saffron color glowing faintly in the dim light. He stared at it for hours, imagining himself putting it on, imagining himself pretending to be something sacred, something trusted. The shame clawed at him, but the fear of not being able to provide for his children clawed harder. By sunrise, his decision was already made. The next evening, he met the man again in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside were two others, men Arun, recognized vaguely from his old drinking group. They greeted him with smirks that made his stomach churn. "You're really doing it," one of them said, handing him a bottle of water. "Good, easy cash." Arun tried to steady his hands as the mysterious benefactor laid out the plan. Not every detail was given, only enough instructions to carry out the staged act. His task was simple, they said. Act like a monk. Walk calmly. Do the motion exactly as instructed. Ignore the meaning behind it. They insisted, again and again, that the religious significance did not matter, that it was just for the camera. But Arun felt the weight of the robe as he put it on. Though it was light, it felt heavy with expectation, heavy with something he could not name. He tied the sash nervously, watching himself in a cracked mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not a holy figure, not a monk, not even a convincing imitation. It was a frightened man pretending to wear dignity. "Good," the benefactor said, stepping behind him. "Now you look the part." Arun looked away from the mirror, unable to meet his own eyes. Whatever path he had been walking before, this was the step that would take him somewhere he could never return from. And in that dim warehouse, wrapped in a robe that was never his to wear, Arun took the first step toward the choice that would unravel his life. For several seconds after the man crushed the consecrated host beneath his heel, time seemed to freeze inside the quiet little church. The two elderly women stood rigid, their hands trembling, too stunned to move or speak. The protagonist, still trapped in his counterfeit monk attire, felt his heart pound violently inside his chest. A cold sweat rolled down his spine as he stared at the small white fragment beneath his sandal. Then a sound broke the tension. The rear door of the church clicked open. He spun around instinctively. An elderly man, thin but upright, stepped inside with a small ring of keys dangling from his belt. He wore a faded brown shirt, trousers rolled neatly at the ankles, and had a cloth bag tucked under one arm. It was the parish caretaker, the man responsible for sweeping the floor, trimming the courtyard plants, and locking the doors each night. The caretaker froze mid-step. His eyes, clouded by age but sharp with awareness, darted from the trembling worshippers to the intruder standing near the altar. He saw the fake monk's foot still poised awkwardly over the scattered fragments. He saw the look of guilt, shock, and panic twisting the man's face. And in that instant, he understood. He didn't understand the deeper motives nor the scheme behind the disguise, but he knew enough to grasp that something wrong, deeply wrong, was taking place. "What are you doing up there?" the caretaker asked, his voice soft but firm. He was not shouting, not accusing, not condemning, only trying to understand. The question sliced through the protagonist. He stumbled backward, nearly slipping. His throat tightened so severely that his breath came in shallow, ragged bursts. It's not," he stammered, but the words tangled in his mouth. He tried again, but nothing coherent came out. The caretaker stepped forward cautiously, moving toward the altar, his expression shifting from confusion to concern. He was not angry. He looked more bewildered than anything, as if struggling to fit this strange violation into the quiet rhythm of his daily duties. Behind them, one of the elderly women whispered, "Call Father. Call someone," the protagonist snapped. The whisper, the eyes on him, the trembling hands, everything collided inside his mind, exploding into panic. His body reacted before his thoughts could catch up. He backed away from the altar and bolted down the aisle, the fake robe flapping wildly behind him. "Wait!" the caretaker called out, reaching out a shaky hand. But the man didn't stop. He shoved the church doors open and burst into the sunlight, gasping for air as though he had been underwater. His senses spun wildly. He heard his pulse, louder than the world itself. Outside, hidden cameras captured his escape, his flushed face, the terror in his eyes, the robe slipping off one shoulder. One of his accomplices hurriedly tucked his phone away, pretending to tie his shoe. Another climbed onto the motorbike and pretended to be a curious passerby. The protagonist sprinted past them without a word, without a plan. He turned the corner, ducked behind a row of market stalls, and ripped off the saffron robe. He stuffed it into a plastic bag he found lying on the ground, hands shaking uncontrollably. His accomplices followed at a distance. They didn't help him. They didn't speak. They only watched, calculating, assessing like predators, studying whether their catch was still useful. Inside the church, the caretaker gently ushered the two elderly women to a pew, calming their nerves before kneeling down to collect the scattered white fragments with trembling, respectful hands. He did not raise his voice. He did not call the police. He did not alert the neighborhood. He was old enough to know that panic only fed chaos. Instead, he locked the church doors silently after escorting the women outside. He called the parish priest privately, explaining in measured, deliberate detail what he had witnessed, emphasizing that shouting or gathering crowds would only make things worse. "There was a man," he said quietly, "dressed like a monk, but something was wrong." He looked frightened, not angry, frightened. The priest, startled but composed, instructed him to keep the matter discreet for the moment while they assessed the situation. But outside the caretaker's control, the world had already begun to move. The first clip surfaced online within an hour. It was shaky, angled from behind a fruit stall. The video captured the man in the monk robe stepping onto the altar, lifting the host, pausing, then crushing it beneath his foot. The sound of the elderly woman's gasp echoed clearly in the recording. The camera shook as the man fled. The caption read, "Fake monk desecrates sacred object in small-town church." Within minutes, reactions began pouring in. Shock, Outrage. Confusion. Speculation. Some comments asked whether the man was truly a monk. Others questioned what the video meant or who had filmed it in the first place. A few suspected it was staged, but no one had answers. A second clip surfaced half an hour later, a clearer one, filmed from the side angle. It showed the man hesitating, looking terrified, then stepping down. The emotional complexity in his face sparked conversations. Was he forced? Was he mentally unstable? Was he doing it for money? Was it political? The caretaker, unaware of the storm unfolding online, sat quietly on a wooden bench outside the church, his hands folded over his cane. He looked toward the gate, troubled. His instinct had been to contain the damage, to trust that internal resolution would prevent unnecessary conflict. But he was from another generation, one where scandal traveled slowly, whispered through markets and bus stops. Now, scandal traveled like lightning. The protagonist, hiding beneath the shade of an abandoned kiosk on the other side of town, checked his cracked phone screen and saw the video. His stomach dropped. His hands shook uncontrollably. His accomplices had told him the footage would be edited, controlled, sold discreetly. They said it would remain in the shadows of certain online groups, not leak into the public sphere. But the video was everywhere. His name was not attached, but his face was unmistakable. Panic turned to dread. Dread turned to a suffocating sense of doom. The air around him seemed to thicken, his chest tightening with each breath. He had committed the act, yes, but that wasn't what terrified him most. What terrified him was the sinking realization that he had been used and discarded, and that the consequences, whatever they were no longer in his hands. The robe lay folded on the shelf, its saffron color glowing faintly in the dim light. He stared at it for hours, imagining himself putting it on, imagining himself pretending to be something sacred, something trusted. The shame clawed at him, but the fear of not being able to provide for his children clawed harder. By sunrise, his decision was already made. The next evening, he met the man again in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside were two others, men Arun, recognized vaguely from his old drinking group. They greeted him with smirks that made his stomach churn. "You're really doing it," one of them said, handing him a bottle of water. "Good, easy cash." Arun tried to steady his hands as the mysterious benefactor laid out the plan. Not every detail was given, only enough instructions to carry out the staged act. His task was simple, they said. Act like a monk. Walk calmly. Do the motion exactly as instructed. Ignore the meaning behind it. They insisted, again and again, that the religious significance did not matter, that it was just for the camera. But Arun felt the weight of the robe as he put it on. Though it was light, it felt heavy with expectation, heavy with something he could not name. He tied the sash nervously, watching himself in a cracked mirror. The reflection staring back at him was not a holy figure, not a monk, not even a convincing imitation. It was a frightened man pretending to wear dignity. "Good," the benefactor said, stepping behind him. "Now you look the part." Arun looked away from the mirror, unable to meet his own eyes. Whatever path he had been walking before, this was the step that would take him somewhere he could never return from. And in that dim warehouse, wrapped in a robe that was never his to wear, Arun took the first step toward the choice that would unravel his life.
The protagonist had barely slept when morning came. He had spent the entire night pacing the floor of his small rented room, replaying the video in his mind, over and over, the shaking camera, the gasps, the moment his foot came down, the caretaker's stunned expression. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same scene unfolding again, harsher and more distorted than before. His phone vibrated non-stop. Notifications, missed calls, group messages, most of them from numbers he did not recognize. He ignored them all. His hands trembled too much to hold the phone steady. Eventually, curiosity or fear forced him to open the screen. And there it was, a screenshot of his face, taken from the clearest angle of the leaked video. His eyes wild with panic, his robe slipping off his shoulder, his body frozen mid-flight as he fled the church. The caption beneath it read, "The fake monk has been identified." His blood turned cold. He scrolled further. Posts, comments, accusations, hundreds of them. Someone had taken a photo from his social media profile and matched it with the footage. Another had posted a blurry picture from when he once worked at a local construction site. Someone else had dug up photos of him picking up his children from school. Everywhere he looked, strangers were connecting the dots, piecing together a version of his life that was half true, half invented, and entirely public. He dropped the phone as though it had burned him. By midday, the entire neighborhood knew. At the small corner market, whispers spread like wildfire. "That's him, isn't it? The man from the video? I knew he wasn't a real monk. Look at his hair, too long, too messy. He used to fix roofs around here. I hired him once. Never thought he'd do something like that. Poor family. What will they do now? Poor. He brought this on himself." People did not shout. They didn't need to. Their quiet disapproval weighed far more heavily than anger. In the dusty yard of his rented home, an old neighbor pointed at the protagonist's front door with a mixture of worry and fear. His children, arriving back from school early, clung to their mother, confused by the strange way adults were looking at them. His wife, exhausted from holding everything together, tried to shield them. She had not yet confronted him. She was waiting, silently, painfully, for him to explain. But he did not know what to say, because how do you admit to your spouse that you had sold your dignity for money? How do you tell your children that you had worn a disguise to disrespect something others hold sacred? How do you explain that you never meant to hurt anyone, that you were simply desperate? There were no words for that. His accomplices vanished within hours. The men who had filmed him, coached him, and promised him easy money suddenly stopped responding. Their phone numbers went dead, their online accounts wiped clean. Even the mysterious benefactor who had approached him in the first place could no longer be reached. He tried calling again and again, even sending frantic voice messages. "Pick up, please, pick up. It's out. The video is everywhere. You said you would control it. You said just call me back. I need help. I need nothing." They had abandoned him the moment things spiraled out of control. Of course they had. Men like them thrived in the shadows. They were careful, untraceable, protected by layers of anonymity. The protagonist was the only one who had shown his face, the only one who had stood in front of the camera, the only one who could be recognized, and now he was the only one left to endure the fallout. By afternoon, he could no longer remain inside. The walls felt too tight, suffocating him with their silence. He had to move, had to breathe, had to find some kind of escape. He stepped outside. The moment his foot touched the street, a pair of eyes found him. Then another, then another. People did not approach him, but their gazes were sharp, pointed, accusing. He heard the rustle of whispers following him like shadows. That's him, the fake monk. He disgraced the church. No, he disgraced himself. Someone should call the authorities. He kept his head down and walked faster. At one point, a man stepped aside to avoid him, as if afraid his presence alone carried something dangerous. Another muttered a prayer under his breath, not directed at him, but for protection from the ugliness of the situation. The protagonist felt each glance like a physical blow. Shame clung to him like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. His breathing grew uneven. He thought of running, but there was nowhere left to run. The worst moment came when a soft voice called out from behind him. "Uncle, why are people saying bad things about you?" He turned. A neighbor's child, the same little girl who used to greet him cheerfully every morning, stood there holding a grocery bag. Her innocent eyes were round with confusion. Her mother quickly pulled her away, whispering sharply for her not to speak to him. That hurt more than any insult. He hurried away, swallowing the lump in his throat. By evening, news reports began circulating. Nothing sensational, but factual enough to confirm what the public already suspected. The authorities were looking into the identity of the man who had entered the church, and they had received credible information. His phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You should turn yourself in. The longer you wait, the worse it gets." That was all. No threats, no insults, just stark reality. He sank onto a bench by the riverside, staring at his trembling hands. He thought about the promise of easy money, the debts, the pressure, the lies he had told himself, the disguise he had worn, and now everything was gone. His accomplices had vanished. The anonymity he had hoped for had crumbled. His reputation, fragile to begin with, was shattered. His wife's silence felt colder than any accusation. He had become the sole face of a scandal engineered by others. The mask had fallen off, and beneath it was a man who no longer recognized himself. And as night crept over the town, he realized a truth he had never feared until now. Mistakes made in desperation still carry consequences, and some consequences cannot be outrun. The next morning arrived with a heaviness that felt almost physical, as though the air itself was thick with judgment. The protagonist awoke on the living room floor, where he had collapsed the night before, after wandering home in a daze. His back ached, his mouth felt dry, and his mind pulsed with the dull, relentless throb of anxiety. He checked his phone before he even fully opened his eyes. No messages, no missed calls, no transfer notifications, nothing from the benefactor, nothing from the accomplices. Silence, cold, absolute silence. He forced himself to sit up, clutching the phone as though squeezing it hard enough might force a reply into existence. He dialed the number that had contacted him weeks earlier, the one that had started everything. Kong Lian Lak Duok Visonai. The automated message repeated itself, polite and merciless. He tried again. Same result. Then he called the first accomplice, the one who had encouraged him, saying, "One job, easy money, no risk, number not in service." The second accomplice, disconnected. The man he met only once in a backroom cafe, the one who told him he could earn more in 30 minutes than he earned in a month, had disappeared as if he had never existed. His stomach twisted. He understood then what he had refused to consider before. He had been used, thoroughly, completely, and then discarded. There would be no payment, no protection, no explanations, no escape, just consequences. His wife stood at the doorway, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had dark circles under her eyes and the strained expression of someone who had cried silently while pretending not to. "You didn't sleep," he said weakly. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him and opened the curtains, letting a harsh slice of daylight flood the room. Dust particles glimmered in the beam, settling slowly around the disheveled furniture. "People came by this morning," she said finally. Her voice was calm, too calm. "Neighbors, women from the market. They asked if it was you." He swallowed hard. "And what did you say?" "I told them I didn't know." Her voice cracked. "But I did know. I saw your face in the video." Everyone did. Silence filled the room thick, suffocating. The children were not home. She had sent them to her sister's house early, not wanting them to hear any more whispers or see the tension simmering between their parents. She leaned against the wall, arms still crossed. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Why would you do something like that? Why would you shame yourself, shame us, like this?" He opened his mouth, but the words clung to his throat. Excuses threatened to spill out: poverty, desperation, debts, pressure. But none of them felt enough. None of them justified the pain in her eyes. "I needed the money," he whispered. Her expression hardened, hurt etching itself deeper into her features. "And did you get it?" He closed his eyes. "No." She exhaled sharply, a sound halfway between disbelief and resignation. "I stood there," she said, tears gathering in her eyes, listening to our children ask why people were whispering at school. I didn't know what to tell them. I didn't know how to explain. She shook her head. "And you weren't here. You just ran off, hiding, while we dealt with everything." "Because..." Her words cut deeper than any insult from strangers. He bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "That's not enough," she said softly, wiping her cheeks. "Not this time." The day dragged on in slow, torturous hours. He paced the cramped living room, checking his phone every few minutes. He called again, hoping that by some miracle the number would work. It didn't. He messaged his accomplices long, frantic paragraphs begging for the money he was promised, asking what to do, pleading for help. The messages remained unread. By afternoon, public anger had intensified. More videos appeared, each one zoomed, edited, captioned. His identity spread rapidly across community groups. One post included photos of him working odd jobs, holding tools, even buying groceries with his children. His private life had become a public spectacle, and with every new post, comments multiplied. "Disgusting. He pretended to be a monk. Imagine that. I hope the police find him. His poor family. He must be punished." He read them all. Each word felt like a stone pressing down on his chest. Around late afternoon, his wife approached him again, this time without anger, but with a kind of exhausted sorrow. "You need to go to the police," she said quietly, "before they come here, before it gets worse." "The Janera's with most life." He stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to turn myself in? I want you to take responsibility," she said. For once, the word responsibility hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so long running from debt collectors, running from failures, running from the truth of who he had become, that the thought of facing consequences felt impossible. I thought I was doing it for us," he said. She shook her head. "No, you were doing it because you were afraid, and because someone promised you an easy way out. But easy ways out always cost more in the end." Her voice didn't carry judgment, only weary truth. That night, he walked alone down a quiet street, trying to gather the courage he didn't have. Every shadow looked like a threat. Every passing motorbike made him flinch. He imagined being arrested on the spot. He imagined being shouted at, beaten, cursed. He imagined his children crying. He imagined his wife leaving. His mind spiraled into dark corners. What if there is no way back? What if I've destroyed everything for nothing? What if this is the moment my life ends, not physically, but completely? The guilt was suffocating. The shame was unbearable. The silence from the men who had used him felt like a sentence. He had no money, no allies, no escape route, no rationalizations left. Only the crushing realization that the life he had tried to save through deceit was collapsing faster than he could hold it together. As midnight approached, he returned home, shoulders slumped, eyes hollow. His wife sat at the table, waiting, hands folded tightly as if bracing herself. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She looked at his face and saw everything. The collapse, the fear, the unraveling of a man who had finally reached the end of his strength. And for the first time since the incident, he allowed himself to whisper the truth. "I don't know how to fix this." And the worst part was, he was right. He didn't know. Because some mistakes cannot be undone, only carried. Night had fallen without him noticing. It was the kind of night that seemed to fold in on itself, heavy, airless, void of sound, except for the faint hum of insects hidden somewhere beyond the reach of the worn street lamps. The protagonist, now stripped of disguises, stripped of certainty, stripped even of the stubborn pride that once propped him up, rode his aging motorbike down a long provincial road that cut through fields, sleeping under darkness. He was exhausted beyond anything he had ever known. The past weeks had gnawed at him. The police inquiry, the neighbors whispering behind shutting doors, the dry-eyed disappointment of his wife, the unanswered messages to the unknown man who had promised money that never came. It was not simply physical fatigue that pressed on him, it was something deeper, something hollowing him out from the center. Shame had become its own kind of weight on his chest, heavier than the helmet strapped beneath his chin. The bike rattled beneath him as if sharing the exhaustion of its rider. Its engine coughed and vibrated, the sound thin and strained. He gripped the handlebars mechanically, his thoughts drifting in scattered fragments, his daughter's brief, confused glance when he returned home, the caretaker's trembling voice retelling the incident on the news, the church's small sanctuary lit by candles he now remembered with a sting he could not name. He no longer told himself the same defensive lines. It was just a job. It wasn't my belief. It didn't matter. Somewhere in him, those excuses had died. A chill wind slid across the road, carrying the faint smell of damp earth. The moon hid behind drifting clouds, leaving only patches of pale, uncertain light. He squinted through the blur of his helmet visor, which he hadn't cleaned for days. Fatigue narrowed his vision into a tunnel. His eyelids fluttered now and then, dangerously slow, each blink lasting longer than it should. He told himself he would rest once he reached home, though home no longer felt like the word it once was. His wife barely spoke to him now. Her disappointment was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow pierced him deeper than anger ever could. She had once believed him capable of more. Now she didn't know what to believe. The road stretched on in a soft curve ahead, its edges swallowed by brush and darkness. A lone street lamp flickered, then steadied. He leaned forward slightly, trying to shake the fog settling in his mind. That was when his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message. For a moment, absurd hope flashed. Maybe it's him. Maybe he finally answered. He reached for it instinctively, one hand lifting off the handlebar. The motorbike wobbled. He gripped again quickly, heart jumping. But the moment of imbalance was enough to set off a small chain of errors. The front wheel drifted toward the soft shoulder of the road. The loose gravel shifted beneath the tires, and the bike began to slide. He tried to correct it, but his reflexes were dulled, too slow. The handlebars jerked violently. The world tilted. There wasn't a dramatic crash, no violent explosion of sound. Instead, everything happened in a muted, overly gentle way, as though the moment wrapped itself in cotton. The motorbike skidded sideways, scraping along the gravel. His body slid with it, the helmet striking the ground with a single, hollow thud. The bike toppled, then lay still, its engine sputtering once, twice, before settling into silence. For a few seconds, he did not know whether he was awake or dreaming. He lay on his back, staring up at the sky. The clouds drifted slowly apart, revealing a thin slice of moonlight. It felt impossibly far away. Pain arrived not as a sharp stab but as a deep ache, spreading through his limbs, blooming in slow waves. He tried to move, but his body answered with only a faint tremor. The quiet was enormous. The fields around him exhaled their cool breath. The motorbike's cooling metal ticked softly. Shame, regret, fear, they all rose in him, then fell apart, leaving behind an emptiness that frightened him more than anything else. He thought of the church again, not the act, not the anger, not the cameras, but the silence of it before he had done anything. The stillness, the sense of being watched, not with hostility, but with sadness. He didn't know why that memory returned now. His breaths came shallowly. The helmet pressed awkwardly against the side of his jaw. Somewhere in the distance, a stray dog barked. Once, then again. A faint breeze rustled through the grass along the ditch. The world, indifferent to his collapse, continued moving gently. He wondered what his wife would think when she heard the news. He imagined her arriving at the hospital, eyes swollen from sleeplessness. He imagined her hesitating at the doorway, torn between anger and compassion. He imagined his daughter peeking from behind her, confused. He imagined the caretaker, somewhere far away, kneeling in quiet evening prayers, unaware of the man who had wronged him, now lying broken on a roadside. He wanted to cry, but no tears came. The moon slipped behind a cloud again, dimming the world. His breath rattled softly. He was alive, but barely. And in the deep, hushed dark of the empty road, he understood something with painful clarity. The real crash had not happened tonight. It had begun months ago, with the first small compromise, the first lie he let himself believe, the first step toward a job he should never have taken. Tonight was only the moment everything caught up with him. He closed his eyes, the sound of distant wind his only companion, and waited for headlights that were still nowhere in sight. The hospital room smelled faintly of antiseptic and something metallic he could not name. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead, its steady hum blending with the soft beeping of machines stationed beside his bed. When he first woke, he thought he was underwater, everything muffled, dulled, filtered through pain and medication. It took long moments for his eyes to adjust, and even longer for the memories to return in scattered, painful fragments. The crash, the cold road, the silence, the weight of everything he had done. He tried to move, but only his left hand twitched weakly. Pain flared, deep and unmerciful, radiating across his chest and down both legs. His throat was dry, his lips cracked. A nurse noticed his stirring and approached quietly, adjusting tubes and monitors with practiced calm. She spoke gently, but her words faded in and out, as though his mind was still submerged somewhere below the surface. All he understood was that he was lucky to be alive, and that recovery would not be simple. When the nurse stepped away, he found himself staring at the ceiling tiles, their dull pattern repeating endlessly. It was a blank canvas, and in its emptiness he began to see the pieces of his life distorted, painful, unavoidable. His deception, his disguise, the foolish pride that made him believe he was in control. The moment he crossed a line he had never imagined crossing. He had told himself he needed the money. He had told himself the church was nothing to him. He had told himself the job was simple: act, record, vanish. But the lie was heavier now. It settled against his chest, suffocating. The consequences had not stayed contained. They had spilled into communities, into faith, into families who watched the video and felt pain he had never intended but never prevented either. He saw the comments online: anger, disappointment, confusion. The incident had spread farther than he ever imagined, and everywhere it went, it carried his face, his foolishness, his cruelty, and his family suffered for it. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by a grief deeper than the physical pain. A soft sound at the door made him open them again. His wife stood at the threshold, uncertain, her hand gripping the doorframe as if steadying herself. She looked smaller than he remembered, exhausted, eyes shadowed from too many nights spent awake. Her clothes were the same ones she had worn earlier that week, as though she had stopped caring about such things. Their eyes met, and the silence between them thickened. She stepped inside slowly, each footstep deliberate, cautious. There was fear in her face, but also anger and confusion, and something he could not bear to name. She approached the side of his bed, stopping just short of reaching for his hand. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her attempt to steady it. He tried to respond, but his throat refused to form words. Only a rough, broken sound escaped. She winced, not from disgust, but from the helplessness of seeing him like this. A nurse followed her in and quietly explained his condition. The fractures, the head injury, the trauma to his spine that affected his movement. She spoke clinically, but his wife absorbed every word with visible pain. When the nurse left, she finally spoke again. "Why?" Her voice cracked on the single syllable. "Why did you do it?" 14. He blinked slowly, breath shallow. He wanted to answer. He wanted to tell her everything. The desperation, the manipulation, the man who promised money and vanished, the way pride had pushed him to justify the unjustifiable. But the words remained trapped in his throat. All he could manage was a slight movement of his fingers, an apology shaped in silence. Tears filled her eyes, but she wiped them away quickly, as though refusing to let emotion take control. She wasn't here to forgive him. She wasn't here to punish him either. She was here because, despite everything, he was the father of her children, and he was alive but broken. She sank into the chair beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then the door edged open again. Their two young children peeked in, uncertain, frightened, clinging to the nurse who guided them. His son hid half his face behind his sister, who held tightly to the nurse's hand. They approached the bed timidly, eyes wide. Their daughter spoke first, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Daddy, why can't you get up?" His throat tightened. He tried so hard to force even the smallest answer out, but nothing came. His son stepped closer, his small hand brushing the sheet near his arm. "Daddy, are you mad at us?" he asked, misunderstanding everything in the innocent way only children could. "You don't talk anymore." The pain that pierced him then had nothing to do with broken bones. His wife knelt beside the children, explaining in simple words that Daddy was hurt, that Daddy needed time, that Daddy couldn't speak yet. Her voice wavered, but she kept it gentle, steady, motherly. The children nodded slowly, though neither fully understood. They only understood that their father, once strong, once the one who lifted them, played with them, scolded them gently, was now fragile, pale, and surrounded by tubes. His daughter reached out and placed her hand carefully over his. "It's okay," she whispered, as if comforting him. "You can get better. We'll wait. Problems." That simple kindness, undeserved, guileless, broke something in him. Tears welled, then spilled slowly down his temples, tracing the curve of his face. His wife saw, and her expression softened, conflicted. She still hurt. She still doubted. She still carried the weight of betrayal. But she also saw the remorse, the collapse of the man she once knew, into a man learning painfully what he had done. She sat back in the chair, her hand hovering uncertainly over his arm before finally settling there. Her touch was neither warm nor cold. It was honest. "We'll talk later," she murmured. "When you're stronger." Dopes. The children stayed a few minutes longer, their presence a small, flickering warmth in the sterile room. When they finally left, the silence returned, but it was changed now. No longer cold, no longer empty. It was a silence filled with consequences, yes, but also with the faintest outline of a path forward, if he chose it. He stared at the ceiling again, but it no longer felt blank. His thoughts were clearer now, sharper, and for the first time since the night of the crime, he did not try to hide from them. He had deceived. He had harmed. He had allowed himself to be used. He had brought suffering to others, especially to those who had loved him most. The truth was harsh, unforgiving. But here, in this quiet hospital room, he understood that facing it was the first step toward whatever redemption might still be possible. And he was finally ready to face it. The nights grew longer for him in the hospital. Time lost its shape, dissolving into a slow, painful cycle of half-sleep, pain medication, and moments of drifting consciousness. Sometimes he thought he heard rain on the windows, but when he struggled to open his eyes, there would be only the dim, motionless glow of the corridor lights. Other times he sensed voices, nurses passing by, footsteps, distant murmurs, but they floated like echoes from another world. His condition had begun to worsen. The doctors explained it to his wife in words she tried to absorb, but could barely comprehend. Complications, internal damage, infections that resisted treatment. They spoke gently but did not disguise the truth. His body was failing. When she entered his room that evening, her steps were slower than usual. She had come every day, no matter how exhausted she was, no matter how many things were left undone at home. But something in her posture tonight revealed that she had heard the words no family member ever wished to hear. He looked at her with dimming eyes. The machines beside him beeped unevenly, and his breathing had become shallow, occasionally interrupted by small spasms he couldn't control. His entire body felt like it was wrapped in a cold veil he could not shake off. She sat beside him and placed her hand lightly over his. Her touch was different, now gentler, but also trembling. He could sense her fear. He could sense her grief too, even though she tried to hide it behind a steady expression. He had once been the one who carried the burdens of the house, who reassured her in moments of uncertainty. Now she was the one holding him together, even as she watched him come undone. He tried to speak. His voice had not returned, only a faint rasp, but he forced the sound out anyway. His throat burned, his chest shook. The words were fragments, barely audible. Saw, Rai. His wife leaned closer, tears immediately filling her eyes. You don't have to, she whispered. But he squeezed her fingers weakly, insisting. He needed her to listen. He needed her to know. He gathered every ounce of strength left in him. His vision blurred, then refocused. The room wavered, but he continued, pushing air through damaged lungs. Kids, you, good life, not like me. Her tears spilled freely now. She pressed her forehead to his hand, crying silently so the children outside wouldn't hear. The nurse had taken them to a waiting area earlier, offering coloring books to distract them. They didn't know what was happening. They only knew Daddy was sick again. He swallowed with difficulty, grimacing in pain. Wrong. His breath caught. He blinked hard, trying to stay present. So wrong. Tech, and I have tech, and end free. His wife lifted her head, brushing her cheeks quickly. She didn't stop his confession. Something inside her understood that he needed to release these words, not for forgiveness, but for truth. He stared at the ceiling as if the memories were written there. I thought, money, help us. A painful pause, but hurt. Everyone. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. She had known the outline of the story from the police, from neighbors, from the viral video, but she had never heard it from him. And hearing it now, in his failing voice, broke her in a way she had not expected. I let them use me. Another breath, ragged and thin. I let fear make choices, too. Arnfrid, her hand tightened around his. I know, she whispered. I know you were scared. I know you weren't thinking clearly. He shook his head very slowly. No excuses, no deflection. Still, my choice. The monitor beeped irregularly, a sound she had come to dread. He drew in another breath, one that shuddered painfully. If I go, he paused, as though gathering the words from some disappearing place inside him. Raise them. Strong. Honest. Please, don't let them. Follow me. A sob escaped her this time, raw and uncontrollable. She covered her mouth with her free hand, trying to muffle it. He watched her with sorrow that went deeper than any wound on his body. She leaned closer to him, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. I will, she whispered. I'll raise them well. They'll grow up knowing right from wrong. I promise you. His eyes closed for a moment, relief flickering over his exhausted features. He wanted to say more, to apologize again, to tell her she deserved better, to thank her for every sacrifice, every moment she stayed despite everything. But language had begun to slip away from him. His breaths grew shorter, shallower, his wife noticed. She wiped her eyes and moved closer, almost embracing him without disturbing the tubes and wires. She held his hand with both of hers, as if keeping him grounded in the world. You're not alone, she whispered. "I'm right here." He blinked weakly. A tear rolled from the corner of his eye. Outside the room, the hallway was quiet. Night staff moved slowly. The world continued, steady and indifferent, unaware of the quiet tragedy unfolding behind this single door. Inside, the air felt impossibly heavy. He mustered one last attempt at speech. "One day," he coughed softly, breath faltering. "Tell them I loved them." His wife nodded rapidly. "I will, I promise." He exhaled, shallow, trembling, but peaceful. For the first time in weeks, he seemed to relax, the tension in his brow easing. His gaze softened as he looked at her, filled not with fear but with a sadness that also carried a small shard of hope. A hope that what remained of his life, broken, misguided, cut short, might still leave something good behind. Minutes passed in fragile silence. Then the beeping shifted. The nurse rushed in. A doctor followed. Footsteps filled the room. His wife stood back, hands over her mouth, trembling as she watched the flurry of movement around his bed. She prayed not to any particular deity, but to life itself, that he might hold on just a little longer. But the monitors steadied into a flat, unbroken line, and in that moment, everything stilled. The doctors lowered their hands. The nurse bowed her head. His wife staggered forward, catching the side of the bed as though her knees might give way. The room felt colder, the world felt heavier. Yet even through her sobs, she held on to one truth. He had tried, at the end, to take responsibility. He had faced what he had done. He had asked for better for his children than the path he had taken. It didn't erase his mistakes. It didn't undo the harm. But it was something fragile, painful, human. And so, in the quiet of that hospital room, the reckoning came to its final rest. Not with condemnation, not with rage, but with the tragedy of a man who let desperation guide him and the lingering hope that his children might walk a different road. The days following his passing moved with a heavy, muted rhythm. His wife felt as though she were wading through a fog that refused to lift. There were documents to sign, bills to settle, relatives to inform, arrangements to make all the practical burdens that fall upon the living when someone dies. Yet every step felt unreal, as if she were watching herself from outside her own body. His funeral was small. A few neighbors came, some out of respect, some out of lingering curiosity about the tragedy that had shaken the community. Most, however, came quietly, without judgment, because despite everything he had done, death has a way of softening even the hardest hearts. His wife watched as the simple coffin descended into the earth, her children clinging to her sides, asking questions she did not yet know how to answer. Life did not pause after that. It never does. She returned home to a house that suddenly felt too large, too quiet, too full of memories of a man who had lost himself long before losing his life. His clothes still hung where he had left them. His motorbike helmet sat on the shelf, cracked from the accident but untouched since. The small notes he once scribbled for her lay folded in a drawer, the ink fading. She began sorting through his belongings one evening after the children had fallen asleep. She found little signs of the man he had been before. Everything spiraled: a stack of unpaid bills he had hidden out of shame, the envelopes from lenders, and the old photos of their family in happier times. She traced her fingers over the images, realizing with pain that desperation had crept into his life long before she recognized it. The community, too, began to shift in the aftermath. At first, outrage had swelled like a storm, fed by anger and misunderstanding. But as the truth surfaced piecemeal through investigations, statements, and the eventual disappearance of the anonymous instigators, people began to see the deeper layers of the incident. He had not acted out of hatred. He had not been driven by ideology or religious resentment. He had been manipulated, pressured, and abandoned. Slowly, the narrative changed. Some churches and temples in the region even released gentle public statements, urging peace over anger, reminding their followers that moments of weakness and exploitation did not define entire communities or reflect true spiritual values. A few leaders spoke quietly of compassion for all involved, even for the man who had committed the act, recognizing the human fragility at its core. And as this understanding spread, the sharp edges of the scandal began to soften. Yet for his wife, understanding did not erase heartbreak. Rebuilding her life became a quiet journey. She took on extra work, asked relatives for help when she had to, and spent long nights comforting her children when they woke crying for their father. She learned to navigate loneliness with resilience, She never knew she had. Every choice she made now carried twice the weight, one for herself and one for the man who could no longer walk beside her. Still, she held on to his final words. Raise them strong, raise them honest. They became a kind of compass for her. As the months passed, the online chatter faded. The videos were taken down in most places, replaced by other stories, other flames of momentary outrage. Life returned to its familiar rhythms, and what had once seemed like an unending scandal slowly dissolved into a memory, discussed only in whispers or during the rare reminder of caution. But in the place where it had happened, in the quiet church, in the village where he once lived, the story remained, not as a wound, but as a lesson. Parents told it to their teenagers as a warning about manipulation. Religious leaders referenced it softly when speaking about compassion. Neighbors retold it not with accusation, but with a sigh of sorrow for how fragile a human can become when cornered. And in the closing narration of this story, one truth stands above all. This is not a tale pointing fingers at any faith, any institution, or any community. It is not a weapon, nor a judgment. It is a mirror reflecting how easily a person can be pushed beyond their moral edge when fear, poverty, or desperation tightens around them. A reminder that behind every wrongdoing lies a complicated chain of influences, some malicious, some circumstantial, some born from the simple fatigue of trying to survive. Deception wounds everyone it touches. It harms the victims who are blindsided by it. It harms the communities forced into conflict by misunderstandings. It harms the families left behind to pick up the broken pieces. And, perhaps most of all, it harms the perpetrators themselves, those who believed, even for a moment, that a small moral compromise could remain small. It never does. As the final words settle, let this story not fuel division, but illuminate understanding. Let it not cast blame, but invite reflection. Let it remind us that compassion is often most needed where it is least expected. And so this story ends not with condemnation, but with a warning. Not with judgment, but with a call to remain vigilant, discerning, and humane. A call to think, not to divide. His gaze softened as he looked at her, filled not with fear but with a sadness that also carried a small shard of hope. A hope that what remained of his life, broken, misguided, cut short, might still leave something good behind. Minutes passed in fragile silence. Then the beeping shifted. The nurse rushed in. A doctor followed. Footsteps filled the room. His wife stood back, hands over her mouth, trembling as she watched the flurry of movement around his bed. She prayed not to any particular deity, but to life itself, that he might hold on just a little longer. But the monitors steadied into a flat, unbroken line, and in that moment, everything stilled. The doctors lowered their hands. The nurse bowed her head. His wife staggered forward, catching the side of the bed as though her knees might give way. The room felt colder, the world felt heavier. Yet even through her sobs, she held on to one truth. He had tried, at the end, to take responsibility. He had faced what he had done. He had asked for better for his children than the path he had taken. It didn't erase his mistakes. It didn't undo the harm. But it was something fragile, painful, human. And so, in the quiet of that hospital room, the reckoning came to its final rest. Not with condemnation, not with rage, but with the tragedy of a man who let desperation guide him and the lingering hope that his children might walk a different road.